Hello, wonderful people. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to my channel, We Are All Plants. This is another installment of Therapy Chats and Plant Chores. My name is Jess. I am a therapist based out of South Florida. If this is your first time joining me, welcome. If this is not and you're returning, I'm so glad you're here. And yeah, today we are going to be talking about a pretty unique topic within mental health, and that is faith or religious deconstructing. I'm going to be talking to you today about why people deconstruct, what that even means, and we're also going to be chatting about how to support people while they're deconstructing. Especially in light of the pandemic, I have had the incredible opportunity to work with and meet and dive into these stories of people who have been deconstructing, and I have noticed that there is a lot of misinformation out there, and there's also a lot of confusion. And through working with people and their stories, I have just felt a huge desire to provide more education on the experience of people who are deconstructing, especially since it's a time in life and it's a transitional period for some where they just really need a lot of support. So I'm really excited to talk about it. I just want to give you a quick heads up. This is purely based on my experience as a trauma therapist and as someone in South Florida and as someone who has directly worked with people who identify as deconstructing humans. So you might have a very different opinion. You might have a very different interaction with this term. That is all totally fine. So if you're interested in learning about what I have to say about deconstructing, please continue watching. I'm super excited about it. So while I'm talking about deconstructing, I'm actually going to be repotting this Philodendron Burl Marks. I got this plant at Home Depot. It was the last one left, and so I brought it home. It was doing well, but then I started to notice that the leaves have been turning kind of yellow in some places, and I realized, you can see this one right here, maybe, and I noticed, I know this is gonna spill everywhere, but it's gonna come out anyways, that there are ginormous roots coming out of the bottom, so definitely need to repot this guy up. I'm going to be putting him in this big old guy. I'm probably gonna end up cutting it down a little bit because this is pretty large. I also don't have another bigger pot. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. So let's get started. All right, so we're gonna talk about deconstructing, but we can't talk about that without first acknowledging what is deconstructing? What does that even mean? So deconstructing, there is no specific official term in relation to the religious experience and the faith experience that some people go through, but basically, especially through what we're seeing a lot of today, it's a process of thinking independently, mostly through questioning things. So you start to just kind of ask why, you start to ask, well, what if, and you just start to really develop a more either in-depth understanding of what you're already learning about and experiencing, or people ask a lot of questions and then they move on to either a different faith or religion or whatever have you. Before I move forward, I really just want to reiterate that everyone's experience through religion is different. I'm also not strictly talking about Christianity or evangelicalism, although because that's my background and that is primarily the people who seek me out, are people who are deconstructing from some sort of Christian faith or some sort of evangelicalism. There are a lot of other people who are also deconstructing their own faith and their own religious upbringing. And so you might be looking at this through a different lens, but I promise you this term does apply to a lot of other faiths and religions out there. This is also more about a person's experience within their faith or religion than it really even sometimes has to do with the faith or religion themselves. And so what I mean by that is sometimes people still maintain their faith or religion, whatever it is, but they have had really traumatic experiences that brought them there. And I'm going to go into that a little more in depth, but I also just wanted to bring your attention there. It's also really important to keep in mind, especially if you're someone who is relatively confused by this term, everyone's experience with faith and religion is different. And so maybe you have a really fantastic experience with yours and you just love your church, you love your religious place that you go, you really enjoy the spiritual leaders that you seek counsel from, and all of those things. Oh my gosh, sorry, I have to pause, but these roots are totally sticking to the sides of this pot. Oh my gosh, it was totally overgrown. Oh my goodness. Anyways, so sometimes people can hear deconstructing and they already think, well, that's not a really great representation of our belief system or of our religion or of our faith. And that's totally fine, but it is a person's experience. And so really keeping that in mind, and that's why I mentioned that earlier, of this is genuinely about a human's experience within the practice of the religion or faith that they belong to. Now that we kind of know what deconstructing actually is, I'm going to go into kind of why people deconstruct. Why is this something that anyone even bothers doing? And there are so many reasons. There's so many reasons why someone would deconstruct. I am not going to go over every single possible reason out there, but I am going to kind of navigate the big ones, especially the big ones that I have observed during my time working with people. So one of the biggest, and again, especially because I am a trauma therapist, one of the biggest things I get a lot is quite simply trauma or incredibly negative experiences within the religion or faith that these people have once belonged to. And so this can be anything from physical, sexual, psychological abuse, anything along those lines can be happening and do happen quite frequently within the church. There's often pretty intense power dynamics and not a lot of policies already in place for people to seek help if they are being abused. And so there can be quite a lot of issues that arise within these organizations. Is that every organization? Absolutely not, but there is a lot. So trauma and negative experiences within deconstructing absolutely can involve leadership, and especially if leadership is abusive in any way, shape, or form. And it is, again, something that is pretty common, though you might not hear a lot about it because most people are coming to their therapist to talk about them and other trusted people, and not necessarily the whole congregation or the whole body of the faith or religion that they belong to. There can also be trauma or negative experiences within family dynamics that heavily rely on these religious beliefs, these faith backgrounds, and maybe are using them in a way that's really toxic or really abusive and can cause a lot of damage within the home. So it doesn't even have to necessarily occur within the walls of whatever faith or religion. It can definitely occur like in the home as well. And then there's also the component of community. Again, sometimes this isn't necessarily even happening really within the congregation or again within the spiritual body, but more so, or the religious body, or even in the home, but it can even be within the person's community. How members of whatever religious or faith-based space you're in, are the people treating you well? Are the people saying really damaging things and taking things out of context and really accidentally, even if well-intentioned, causing a lot of harm? So that's definitely a lot of different ways that people can deconstruct within a traumatic or negative experience background. Other people deconstruct because they have been made to feel inherently sinful or evil. I definitely hear from a lot of people that they feel dirty all the time. They feel gross, especially a lot of people, again, who are Christian identify themselves as just sinners and that's it, and that they are essentially nothing without the spiritual leader or the figure that they are worshiping or identifying with. And this can lead to a lot of self-esteem issues. This can lead to a lot of depression, anxiety, imposter syndrome. This can lead to a variety of different things that essentially makes the person feel like they are not enough. And that is a very common thing, again, that I find, especially within evangelicalism. Wow, I am so glad that I am rebotting this because I am having to do this so slowly because the roots are completely and totally just like connected to the sides of this pod. Oh no. Another reason why people deconstruct is simply because of burnout. There's a lot of people who do a lot of volunteer work within their faith and religious practices, regardless of whether that's in the community or even if that is just in the building itself. And that is all fine and good, but a lot of people definitely feel pressured. They feel peer pressure, they feel pressure within the institution, they feel like they have to essentially work two jobs by working their full-time job, whatever that is, where they actually make money, and then doing a lot of volunteering through the church. And so again, oftentimes there's just simply a lot of burnout that's occurring within these structures structures and in people's lives. And that in turn leads to a lot of mental health issues, again, such as anxiety and depression. And it can really feed into this idea that I'm inherently sinful and unworthy because I can't keep up with everything else and everyone else. There's also burnout that can happen when a person doesn't accept that their relationship with their faith or religion is enough, that they have to constantly be pursuing things more intensely and more vigorously. Now, this is not to mean or to say that you can't be more educated or that you can't dive deeper into your practice, but there is something when people just don't accept where you're at as enough, and you're just always having to search for more and be more and do more for other people and for whatever institution you belong to. I also find that, and this was been the experience again with many people that I see, that people will deconstruct also because there is a huge dismissal of mental health, the legitimacy of mental health, the legitimacy of depression and anxiety, even the legitimacy of therapists, and if therapists can be trusted. A lot of people are informed that they should meet with a pastor or meet with a mentor or meet with some spiritual leader before they're told to go meet with a therapist, even if they're struggling with something like depression, or even if they're struggling with thoughts that they don't want to have. Regardless of where you are morally on that, oftentimes they are not referred to a therapist right away. So with that, you end up getting a lot of people who, unfortunately, for lack of a better term, don't really stay in their lane per se. They do try to play the role of therapist, or they try to take on way more than they're actually qualified for, and that can lead to a lot of damage. It can lead to a lot of mistrust. It can lead to increasing mental health symptoms. It can be pretty damaging to a person. There can also be a minimizing of the mental health symptoms themselves. So for example, again, a very common thing is anxiety or depression. And if a person approaches people within their religious or faith-based structure, they say, hey, I'm feeling these certain things. A lot of times they get the, well, have you tried this prayer? Or have you tried reading this thing? And instead of just simply sitting with them or telling them to go to therapy or encouraging them to do other more mental health related things, there ends up being a minimization of the symptoms themselves. And it can make the person feel like they, again, are not enough, make them feel like they're failing in some capacity, when in reality, they just are struggling a little bit and need a little bit of mental health help, which we all need every once in a while. I'm really struggling with these roots. They are just so intensely stuck. I don't rip all the roots either, so I'm trying to just baby this and be super gentle with it. Oh man. And then also within mental health, if there is abuse or if someone has done something wrong and they've actually done the incredibly brave thing and confronted someone about it, there's often a conversation of forced forgiveness where they talk about forgiveness instead of healing. So right after an abuse or right after something has been disclosed, there's often straight away a lot of talks of forgiveness and moving forward. There's also been many things in the news, especially where people will simply try to cover up any abuse that is occurring within the congregation because they're trying to protect other people instead of trying to protect the survivor. So any of those reasons can be a reason why someone would deconstruct their faith or religion. So something a little different, but also within the same vein, there's a pretty strong lack of education and understanding of sexuality and consent. So I have a huge background in sexual trauma specifically. So this is again another area where I see a lot of people who come from a faith or religious background and they have engaged in something called purity culture. So for Christians, a lot of people can recognize the term purity culture, but truthfully, just overall, a lot of people who are deconstructing did not receive proper sex education. They did not receive proper education and understanding on what consent is. And consent is something that absolutely needs to be learned, even if you do decide to wait until marriage before you decide to engage with someone sexually. And that is often where people receive a lot of trauma, unfortunately. Even if they are married, even if they're in a really serious relationship, it doesn't matter. Consent is required regardless of who you are, because you have to give consent even if you're married to the person. There's also a lot of language and ways that sexuality and consent and all these things are discussed that can lead to a lot of shame. getting a little closer. Guys, this thing is seriously so stuck. You can get a better idea of the roots and how much they were sticking out at the bottom of this pot now. Oh boy. And people will feel shame for a variety of different reasons. It can be anything from how they perceive sex and what they want their sex life to look like, as well as shame around consent. So there's a lot of shame that can be bred from those things as well that I see a lot, especially in people who are deconstructing. Another reason why I know a lot of people have started deconstructing is because of the lack of social justice initiatives and the lack of conversations that are occurring within certain faith and religious backgrounds, especially in light of everything that happened during 2020 and all of the awareness that was brought to a lot of people. And with very, very long overdue conversations needing to be had, a lot of people are finding that whatever group they belong to are really either, like I said, not having these conversations, or are simply having them in a very negative light, or in a way that is not actually representative of what people actually need, who are relying on these conversations around social justice to occur. There is also a struggle when people realize that there is a deep savior complex baked into a lot of things like missions work, and just in ways that really perpetuate injustices, especially systemically. So again, this would be a very communal reason why someone would be questioning things and why someone would begin to deconstruct. And when I talk about social justice too, some people are on the ends of, oh, this is news to me, and so now I need more awareness. And other people are saying, hey, I am directly impacted by these conversations that we're talking about, and you're not having them, and therefore I don't feel welcomed in your church or in whatever religious structure that people belong into. Along a similar vein, a lot of people begin deconstructing because of a lack of diversity or equality within the structures that they belong to. So either people have really negative beliefs about certain genders or certain races, or certain people who have different gender expressions, or people who don't operate out of the binary. There is also a lack of education surrounding the church's involvement with past race issues. And so I know that in people trying to pursue that, and in many organizations simply ignoring those conversations, that is exactly why a person can be deconstructed. There's also oftentimes a lack of cultural understanding when people who didn't live in America, or are first generation living in America, and they start attending certain religious groups, and they're noticing that they don't feel like they belong because they're not understood, their experience isn't understood, they're hearing these messages that don't really completely apply to them, and so they can absolutely start deconstructing through that lens. And there are also just blatant examples of sexism and racism within certain religious and faith structures. This can also lead to a huge lack of understanding when it comes to gender, especially gender expression versus actual anatomy. And so those conversations again can lead to people feeling a lot of shame or a lot of self-hatred and a lot of other things that can lead to pretty serious mental health symptoms. This is so intense. Oh, this is so root-bound. Yikes. And then one of the last things that I'm going to talk about on why people actually deconstruct is because there can be a pretty universal issue of people who belong to religious and faith groups having an inability to actually listen instead of trying to fix people. So oftentimes what I mean by this is it's not that you aren't actually physically like hearing people when they speak. It's more about, are you sitting with them? Are you validating them? Are you just willing to sit with them instead of trying to give them solutions? When we operate out of a solution-focused state of mind, it can come across as being dismissive of people's mental health symptoms. It can also communicate a huge lack of empathy when people choose to fix instead of just sit with a person and just be with them. And all of that again can either create new mental health symptoms, or it can absolutely perpetuate ones that already exist, especially if the conversation is surrounding mental health. Now you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, what's the difference between fixing someone and just being empathic and listening to them? And one of the biggest ways we can look at this is if you have someone sitting in front of you who says, hey, I'm deeply struggling in this type of area, and I am just feeling really sad, or I'm feeling really anxious, instead of saying, oh, well, have you read this scripture verse? Or, oh, I listen to worship music and that really helps me. That's fine if that's what helps you. And if you found some comfort in those things that I just mentioned, then that's great. But when you automatically give a person a solution instead of simply sitting with them, like I said, it can really be dismissive. Instead of, if someone approaches you and says, hey, I'm experiencing these kinds of things, and you can say, wow, that sounds really hard. I hate that you have to go through that. And that can really just be validating for a person. It can make them feel comforted. It can make them feel seen and known and heard. And oftentimes when we race to giving people solutions instead of just sitting with them, it's oftentimes a reflection of our own discomfort surrounding what the person is talking about, and B, if we're not even taking the time to listen and be curious and ask more questions of the person, then we're most likely giving them solutions that aren't actually helpful. Oh, I think we got it. Ooh, man. Check it out. So many roots. Oh my gosh. They were all so stuck. Oh no, and there's like a paint on some of them from the... Yikes. Oh my gosh, this was like really struggling. I'm so glad that I took this out because it really needed to get out. Okay. So now that I've explained to you like why people deconstruct, what it is, the next most important thing is to ask ourselves, well then how do we support people who are going through this process and having this experience? And it's actually way simpler than we may think. But first and foremost, one of the biggest things I think I can say is that people who are deconstructing do not need to be saved. It is okay if you are concerned about them. It is okay if you are worried for their well-being. But again, from what I have experience and what a lot of other people have also told me and echoed in their experience is that people are more concerned with the way they are practicing a certain faith or religion instead of what they've actually been through and what traumas they're navigating and what negative experiences they're navigating. And this again can lead to a lot of minimizing, it can lead to a lot of dismissal, even if that's not intended per se. That's definitely something to make sure you're really sitting with yourself, is making sure you are taking a hard look at yourself and asking yourself, am I just trying to save this person, or am I actually trying to understand their experience? So a person who's deconstructing really just needs a safe space to be heard. They need a safe space to be validated. They really just need someone who will actually take a moment and sit with them and listen. For example, if people are going to be dismissive, it can look a lot like, oh, well, my church doesn't do that, or that's not who God actually is. So you should do this, or you should do that, or you should just join my church. And again, while you might be genuinely trying to help the people who you're sitting across from, and you're genuinely trying to take this out, I gotta put more soil on the bottom. While you might be very well intentioned and all that, you also might not be understanding of maybe they have PTSD symptoms, or maybe they are just having an incredibly difficult time and that's not really what they need in the moment. So again, really sitting with them and listening to their struggles, listening to their story is going to be super crucial when interacting with someone who's deconstructing. So instead of maybe trying to invite them to whatever religion you belong to or whatever service you're attending, something else that can be really important is just saying, hey, let me get to know your story, and then just validating their experience, just understanding that you are not the expert in this whole scenario, and truly the person sitting across from you is genuinely trying to figure it out, and they're trying to make the best with what they're given in the moment. So kind of similar to what I mentioned earlier, you can look at someone and say, wow, that seems really hard. I'm here for you. Please, if you are ever having a really sad night and you just want to hang out with me, like let me know and I'll hang out with you. If you are feeling really anxious and you need someone to kind of walk you through a breathing exercise, I'm here for you. There are so many beautiful ways you can help someone who's deconstructing, even if you are confused or don't fully understand the experience of what the person is navigating. But truly, whenever someone is deconstructing, they really need to be healing from whatever they have been just experiencing, again, whatever trauma or negative experience they're going through, or whatever questions they might have. It's important that they find healing in that. And spirituality, faith, and religion can be very healing for some people, but they're not always healing for everyone, especially in certain moments. So if they're not engaging in any specific practice right away, if they are not really wanting to chat about whatever faith or religion you belong to, that's okay. They can still heal. And that's where therapy comes into play and is really important, or even a life coach or anything along those lines, an embodiment coach, anything like that can be really helpful to someone who's going through that experience. So again, faith and spirituality and religion can be helpful, but it's not always helpful, and it's not the only thing people need to heal. Patience is going to be another big thing as well, just sitting with a person and letting them navigate their struggle. I promise you, if you try to force things down their throat and you try to get people to be in a place that they're not, it's just going to backfire on you, and if anything, it's going to completely hinder a person's ability to heal and thrive in their own way. Also, just to clarify, because I find that this is another misconception too, just because people are deconstructing doesn't mean they're actually leaving whatever faith or religion they belong to. Oftentimes people do, but that's not always the case. And so again, just really getting to know and understand the person's unique experience within it all is going to serve you and that person way better in the long run. Oftentimes people who are deconstructing have a very long and lonely journey through it all, because many times they are abandoned by their community, people who they still genuinely love, but who will turn away from them or just ghost them or won't return any of their phone calls or try to have a conversation with them because their journey is super misunderstood, or their family members might abandon them. And so it can be really lonely. So if you are a person who's able to sit with someone who's deconstructing and just see them for the human that they are, regardless of the journey that they're on, it's incredibly important. If you are concerned for them, you can obviously voice your concern, and that person has the right to say thank you or no thank you to your voice of concern. So also just know that people can have boundaries if it's something that you guys need to discuss. So in saying all that, if you get anything from this, please know that people who are deconstructing need community. They need people to talk to. They need people who will simply just listen to them instead of trying to fix them. Because again, that is a very, very common thing that occurs within faith and spirituality. Okay, so that is that. This is my new burl marks all potted up in a much bigger pot. I'm hoping that these roots will have plenty of room to grow, and then this plant will just only continue to thrive. And who knows, maybe in another episode you might see me putting a little trellis or something in here. Who knows? But I hope that you learned a lot about deconstructing. I hope that if you're someone who has never done that before, that now you have gained more awareness of someone who's deconstructing. If you are someone who's deconstructing, I hope this can be a valuable video for you to share with someone if you maybe don't have the words to articulate or are just finding it really hard to communicate with certain people about your journey and what you're experiencing. I also hope that you guys resonated with this and that you maybe even felt a little validated in your experience. It is a true, genuine joy of mine to work with people who are deconstructing. They are near and dear to my heart. They are amazing humans, every single one of them. And another thing I'd like to say really quick is that most people who are deconstructing genuinely love the people that they were in community with. They loved the faith. They loved everything about that. They just noticed that they were being either mistreated, or they had experienced a trauma, or they're experiencing a lot of negativity, or just simply wanted to question things. And so it's not because people just lost their faith. It's not because people just gave up. It's not that people were weak or anything along those lines. It takes an incredible amount of strength for a person to step into the unknown after living in the known for so long. So again, thank you so much for listening to everything. I hope you got something out of it. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave a comment down below. I would love to chat with you. And again, if you resonated with this video, please share it. Please use this video to help explain your experience to other people if you would like. Or again, if you just found this to be interesting. And yeah, please subscribe as well if you want more content like this. If you enjoy plants and therapy talks, it's not always about deconstructing, but I do like to talk about a lot of things that I am involved in, and deconstructing humans is one of them. I also host a bi-weekly deconstructing support group. It is held on every other Wednesday of the month. So if you are curious and interested in that, it's $10 to register. And there's also a bundle deal if you wanted to get both sessions for the month. And then once you register, you will get a Zoom link because it is hosted online, and then you'll get to see me and I'll get to support you along your journey. Even if you don't have anyone else to support you, you will have me and you'll have the people in the group who will absolutely support you 100%. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.